Good afternoon, everyone, and a very warm welcome to our webinar today, Labuan IBFC, your connection to the global digital marketplace. And so I'd like to invite our first speaker, Farah Jaffa, CEO of Labuan IBFC Inc., for the first presentation. Over to you, Farah.
Thanks, Raymond. Thank you everyone for joining us today, and thank you the FinTech Association of Labuan, the Malaysian FinTech Association, Access Malaysia, and all our other regional partners towards making this event possible. We really, are excited. This is actually the last webinar we have planned for the year, so it's really nice to end on a high note in a space that we're all very excited to be in. What I'm going to do at least, is talk us through Labuan IBFC a little bit. And then I think Henry's going to come in and talk specifically quite a little bit more detail and share a little bit more detail with regards to that digital space. And then we're going to finish with this panel, and please, feel free to ask us any questions you may have. Next slide, please. Okay, so we always get this question about where is Labuan? Labuan is an island of Borneo and Borneo, Malaysia. So Borneo actually is, if I'm sure all of you know, it's there's part of Indonesia in Borneo, there's part of Malaysia and also Brunei. But so Labuan is part of Malaysia, obviously, and it's a federal territory under Malaysia, located off Borneo, Malaysia. And what's interesting about Labuan is when we started doing a little bit of research, the word Labuan is actually derived from the Malay word pelabuhan, which actually means port. So, I think since the 14th, 15th century, Labuan has been a very important port of call as travelers traverse the South China Sea, and even until today, it is still home to Asia's deepest natural port, and it's a huge oil and gas center because of that as well. Next slide, please. So Labuan IBFC as a wholesale intermediation hub, financial and business asset risk intermediation hub. We've been around for 30 years actually, and I get this question quite a lot when we're talking to people as to why Malaysia would set up a center like Labuan, and really the answer is quite simple. I think 30 years ago, the Malaysian government looked at all Malaysian corporates growing, and growing quite fast. As we emerged as this tiger economy. And the idea was really for us to have our own wholesale financial intermediation hub to facilitate this growth. And so Labuan IBFC and Labuan IBFC and the financial system really has benefited from organic growth of the jurisdiction, from being a very Malaysian-centric facilitative intermediation hub to intermediation hub that's really truly regional, which is what we are now today. Yeah, we have tax efficiency, obviously tax neutrality. We have this mid-shore jurisdiction proposition, which I'll talk to a little bit, and is really the legal structures that are available in Labuan that facilitate this business. And that's important to remember, especially in that digital space, because Labuan in the digital space allows for what we call a digital wrapper to be used for all our legacy licenses, right? So we have governing legislation. So the governing legislation that we have in Labuan is passed by the Malaysian Parliament. What's important to note is that there's no, and I think this is a perennial question when you look at one country with two systems, very much like China with Hong Kong and Shanghai. What is the arbitrage? So is there an arbitrage opportunity between Malaysia and Kuala Lumpur, for example, onshore? And the truth of the matter is, with regards to taxation, no, there isn't. With regards to anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing issues, no, there isn't. Because that's the beauty of Labuan, in the sense that we are all part of that larger offering of Malaysia. And so in these core areas that create this safe playing space, there is no arbitrage. Yeah, so when you come to Labuan, what you have is a very safe environment. Next slide, please. So we're globally recognized, industry memberships, recognition. So it's all here. You've got your FATF with your ISCO, your International Insurance Associations, your Islamic Financial Services Board, the APG and the GFCS. So these are all multilateral, multinational, multilateral organizations, I should say, that create standards, that provide the parameters, the operational parameters for businesses in Labuan and licenses in Labuan. Next, please. So this is the regulator. I'm going back to that issue of arbitrage, because time and again, especially when we're dealing with a Malaysian audience, which I'm assuming most of you are, there's always the question as to whether there is a sense of arbitrage between Malaysia, what we call mid-shore or foreign, the foreign offering in Malaysia, i.e. Labuan, and the onshore offering. And as you can see, we report to the same bosses at MOF. We rank pari passu with the Securities Commission, Bank Negara, the Inland Revenue Board, and all the rest of it at the bottom of that slide. As you can see, a lot of there's always this misconception in the market, really, and sometimes you can't blame the market for thinking that because of the situation vis-a-vis the chairman of our regulator or the Director General representing our regulator, that we are somehow a subset of the Central Bank of Malaysia. We are not. Let me just say that again, we are not a subset of the Central Bank of Malaysia. We report directly to the Ministry of Finance and the Treasury guys, and what we are, as in the regulator, on behalf of the regulator, what I'm saying is that the regulator is a statutory regulator set up by the Ministry of Finance under an act, statutory act, and we rank pari passu with all the other regulators in Malaysia, right? And as you know, Labuan IBFC actually has two competent regulatory bodies. Again, this is to ensure that there's no arbitrage. Yeah. So Labuan IBFC manages all the elements within the jurisdiction, with the exception of taxation. Taxation is run by a centralized taxation body in Malaysia, the Inland Revenue, or the IRB. Next slide, please. So this talks to this slide actually talks a little bit towards the mid-shore balance, because we get asked this question about, so what is this mid-shore? We understand offshore, we understand onshore. What's this mid-shore? And really, this mid-shore is a blend. It's a blend of the benefits of being offshore, i.e. the proportionality and regulation, the flexibility, the openness of the regulator, the unique solutions, that we have in Labuan, and yet at the same time ensuring that there's conformity to international standards, right? Because as part of Malaysia, we are assessed collectively. So you can imagine a situation where Malaysia will never allow Labuan to be its Achilles heel. And so the standards of supervision, regulatory requirements, enforcement, onshore in Malaysia is actually the same as in Labuan. And in certain circumstances, I have been told that Labuan is actually more strict than onshore in Malaysia in certain very niche areas. Yeah. Next, please. So what makes Labuan IBFC? So, Labuan is an island, as I said earlier, of Borneo. And on this island, if you imagine an island with two little clouds hovering on top of it, one being the onshore cloud, i.e. the domestic rules, one being the international rules via Labuan IBFC, that is basically what you have. So these three balls here represent all the legislative provisions that have been enacted that cater to Labuan, especially under ball number 1 and number 2, right? So ball number 1, those 6 acts actually are governed and supervised by Labuan Financial Services Authority, and the 3 under ball 2, that is enforced and regulated by the Inland Revenue Board. Now, ball number 3 is very interesting, because ball number 3 actually provides that mid-shore element almost to a certain extent. And you can see these are acts of general applications that apply onshore in Malaysia and offshore in Labuan. So you've got your most important anti-money laundering rule, your terrorism financing, mutual assistance on criminal matters, the Anti-Corruption Act, and the Anti-Financial Crime Center, so that's the Crime Center Act. So there's a lot. So really what you're looking at is a hybrid, and hence the word mid-shore. What you're looking at is a hybrid jurisdiction where you have the flexibility of being onshore with those unique structures, right? And yet at the same time, that comfort of knowing that you're in a safe operating environment, right? When you're not going to get blacklisted overnight necessarily, as in some other jurisdictions. Next slide, please. So these acts really create a complete ecosystem of solutions. So at the moment, Lavon's home to more than 850 license holders. So these do not include box standard companies that use Labuan, let's say a pure holding company, for example. These are licensed entities, 850 of them. And I think in the digital space, we've got about 80 plus, about 85 now, right? So it's probably the next to insurance. Well, I think even compared to insurance, the digital space is probably the fastest growing space in Labuan, and we're really excited about it. Next slide, please. So what is Labuan's digital landscape, right? So a digital wrapper for all service offerings, right? What we have is the regulator, this forward-thinking regulator, looking at all their structures and solutions and accepting that a digital wrapper would be allowed for all its service and offerings. I mean, we were on a webinar this morning organized by the Capital Market Development Institute, CM Squared, what I call CM Squared, talking about funds, talking about the possibility of setting up a private PE fund run completely digitally on a blockchain. So that's possible. The reason this is possible is because we have a regulator which you are able to sit down with, talk to, and explain your business process in order for them to really truly understand how that digital element would sit within a box standard business process that you'd expect from a box standard license holder. So this is the beauty of Labuan, right? This is the beauty of Labuan. So digital friendly ecosystem of financial service providers, licenses can be combined, you know, and I talk a lot to this, and the ones, those of you who've you know, we've either met or you've watched me before on a webinar, you'll know that I referenced my 10-year-old's Lego set that comes in as maybe a sailing ship, and after it's disbanded, it turns out to be, I don't know, like maybe a car. And that's the beauty of the solutions in Labuan, right? You can stack them. And because of its cost efficiency, what you can do is create an end-to-end solution through the different license, the category of licenses, in order to create your specific solution, right? So you could have, for example, a crypto exchange via a money broking license, which will then be added to a payment gateway, which could then be added to an STO license via tokenization license. All that could be added together for an end-to-end kind of solution. Or alternatively, and this is one of the things that we've seen quite a lot of now, is that people have come in and started to apply for an investment banking license. An investment banking license will allow, or is a complete license, I guess, a full suite of license, where you can do all, you know, you can operate an exchange, a fund, all the rest of it, have that clearing, have that payment gateway. The only thing that you're unable to do via an investment banking license is actually collect client deposits. So you can't have your CASA, your box standard CASA accounts. But that can be sorted via back-to-back agreement with someone who can. So we have a digital banking framework. We have obviously the Labuan FinTech Association that creates a very holistic environment for the digital ecosystem in Labuan, which is quite interesting. And it's quite unique in the sense that Labuan's home to other associations, but those associations require that you become a member or you are a license holder in order to become a member. But the Labuan FinTech Association is actually open to all. You know, whether you're a student looking at this space, or whether you're a license holder, or whether you're someone just interested in the development within the digital space or the Labuan FinTech space, right? So crypto and digital assets, we provide utility tokens or asset-backed tokens. So we allow for tokenization very easily via our token license. And there's a digital governance and cyber resilience framework that has been launched. Now, I know that, that we allow for eKYC, obviously, and I think I have it I have it on what that actually the regulators looking to allow for security digital signatures as well coming next year. So, you know, as far as possible, they are looking towards facilitating this space clearly, very much so. So we look forward to those digital signatures, the allowance for digital signatures, verified digital signatures, obviously, as well. Next slide, please. So this is the regulatory framework, and it's very similar to ball number 2. If you remember ball number 2 a couple of slides back, this is very similar to that. But what we've done here is that we have actually highlighted the bits that would actually apply, the acts that would actually apply specifically to digital players, and also highlight key licensing and operational requirements. So the fit and proper financial soundness, due diligence vis-a-vis the client onboarding framework. And here is where the EKYC comes in, your internal policies. These are all the elements that the regulator will start looking to look at when you apply for a license, a specific license. And we can discuss this a little bit more during the panel, I think. So that the list at the bottom in this bottom box is really a key, it's a list of key digital licenses. So you've got your banks, your insurtech, your tokens, securities dealers. I got a recent question from one of our insurtechs talking about a crypto to crypto premium situation. So that's quite interesting actually as well. So, you know, the space, as you guys know, it's ever evolving, extremely exciting. And we're keen to take it, we're keen to take it forward. Next slide, please. So this is the growth that we've seen, 2020 highlights. Again, the 2021 numbers, the numbers as of September that I've had the privilege to have a look at, really continues to grow very, very quickly. So as of third quarter, as you can see here, 25 licensing applications were approved in the first 9 months of this year. So 85. So yeah, I wasn't far out there. 85 now. We have 85 digital licenses. The approvals were predominantly Asian, digital assets and e-payment portals, 3 digital investment banks. So remember my reference earlier towards a digital banking license and how that's popular because it allows for a one-stop license for a lot of what's required in that digital space. And 1 digital bank under the digital banking framework that was approved as of third quarter. So 8 digital investment banking, 2 digital commercial banks. So these digital commercial banks are very exciting. We're very keen to get them fully operationalized because what they will allow for is the ramp on and off. And, you know, because they understand the space better, what we'd like to think is that they will assist. They probably will not solve because that's too much of an ask, but probably assist in the perennial bank account opening issue. Yeah, so that's that. Next slide, please. So we commissioned Deloitte, together with them, worked on a white paper on curating a regulated digital ecosystem. And really the thinking behind this was, you know, when we first started in this space, I think, gosh, maybe 4 years ago, everyone wasn't interested in being licensed or regulated. And really, it's kudos to the maturity of the market wanting to be regulated now. I mean, the understanding that there has to come to some kind of a landing with regards to global acceptability and minimum standards. So we wanted to explore that a little bit. So please download this report. If you have a chance, have a read, tell us what you think. This is my last slide. I look forward to your questions at the panel. I want us to have a very interactive, candid conversation. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to seeing you soon on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Farah. With the next speaker, Henry Chong, Chairman of Labuan Fintech Association, we'll get a fresh perspective from an actual digital player representing our jurisdiction. So over to you, Henry.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Henry Chong, and I'm the CEO of Fusang, a digital securities exchange based right here in Labuan. But today I'm going to be wearing the hat of being the chairman of the Labuan Fintech Association, an industry body, as Farah mentioned earlier, and talking a little bit about the ecosystem in Labuan, because as good and as important as it is for a jurisdiction to have the right set of laws, rules, and regulations in place, and of course, having a friendly regulator, it is equally important to have a vibrant and functioning ecosystem in a jurisdiction. None of us can operate alone. Everything and everyone's business requires partnerships. And I think that Labuan has really an unparalleled set of institutions operating there when it comes to being a midshore financial center. Maybe move to the first slide. There are a lot of things happening in Labuan, but maybe just to highlight a couple of key pillars that I think are so important towards Labuan being a hub for digital. The first is, as Farah was talking, the regulator. And Farah talked a bit about the actual structure of how Labuan FSA works. But at least for me, one of the most important things is that the Labuan FSA is a one-stop shop, a single unified regulator that looks across all different kinds of licensed entities and deals with licensing, supervision, and of course, if you actually want to be creating novel investment products, they likewise are the regulator that will approve those as well. I can tell you from my own experience running Fusang, where we do operate in a number of different jurisdictions, some jurisdictions where you have multiple regulators, where different licensed entities report to different people, that can be a problem. And having, especially in the digital space, where technology evolves so fast, having a lack of unity among a number of different regulators is really quite disastrous. And so having the Labuan FSA as a single unified regulator, where they also are so digital friendly and so willing to look at how they can apply existing laws in the digital space. Before I talked about some of those things earlier, things like eKYC, and most importantly, focusing on what I call the principle of regulation, as opposed to getting caught up with the technology. I think a big issue in the digital space with regulators everywhere today is they get lost in the details of technology and don't really think from first principles. When it comes to something like KYC, know your customer requirements, something that licensed entities in digital financial services everywhere in the world just have to do as basic rules of the game. Labuan, I think, has been at the forefront of applying those rules and saying, look, what's the principle? The principle is that you need to know who you're doing business with. You need to make sure you're not doing business with unsavory characters, but there's no particular reason why you can't apply new technology to solving this problem in a novel way. The second thing is that you have Labuan IBFC as the promotional arm of the regulator, but more importantly, providing that interface between the regulator and industry and doing exactly webinars like this. I can tell you again from personal experience that you'll be hard pressed to find another regulator as open or as friendly and as interested in actually pushing forward the forefront of innovation and looking at things like digital as Labuan and Labuan IBFC. And of course, talk a little bit about the Labuan FinTech Association. We've brought together a group of partners from across different license types, from across different business lines, again, to see how we can provide a single industry body to provide feedback around some of these rules and changes and operate in what is, a fast-moving digital age. But if you can maybe move to the next slide, to talk specifically about some of the licenses that Farah mentioned and why having this digital toolbox that she likes to talk about, those Lego bricks, is so important in a place like Labuan, is because, as I mentioned, Labuan's view, and I think that this is the absolute correct view as a regulator, is to focus on what the underlying business activity is, as opposed to getting lost in the details of technology. And one of the most important things that I think the Labuan FSA decided to do was to not have a sandbox. For a lot of regulators, creating digital sandboxes around different licensed entities is one way of being seen as cool and with it. But I actually think that the Labuan FSA choosing not to do this was a very, very important decision, because they decided instead that rather than having new licenses for digital financial services, coming out with a whole new set of rules, to instead, again, focus on the underlying activity. So for example, whether you are a digital bank or a traditional bank, you really should be following the same core set of rules. Your technology, your operations, that might be slightly different in a digital context, but the underlying regulatory principles should not change. And by making that one key distinction, the Labuan FSA opened up this entire toolbox of licenses so that people can come and say, okay, well, maybe I want to do a securities issuance. Again, I don't need a whole new novel license category. I can use an existing license. Maybe I want to start a cryptocurrency exchange. Again, I can go out, I can get a money broking license and have that activity come under a clear license, but also a clear set of existing rules and regulations, right? These things don't have to be built from scratch. And by being able to assemble this toolbox, put together those Lego bricks, there is absolutely no reason why digital players, and I think we'll hear from some of them on our panel later on, cannot do whatever they want in Labuan in terms of novel digital services, but within the context of an existing licensing and regulatory framework. And despite what I think a lot of people may think about innovative digital services, almost all industry players actually want to be licensed. They do not want to avoid regulation. They want to have a stable operating environment and a clear set of rules and regulations that they can come under. And I think that Labuan uniquely provides that. And maybe we can move to the next slide, I think, to talk about an example and really maybe try and highlight why I think this lack of a sandbox and this toolbox of licenses is so powerful. So let's say you're a firm, and I'm willing to bet there are one or two of you on this call today who are interested in cryptocurrencies. Actually, half the world is interested in cryptocurrencies these days. And you said, I need a jurisdiction where I can start a crypto exchange. How do I go about doing this? Well, the first step is I, as an entity, need to go and get licensed. So maybe I'll go and get a money broking license, as you see there, in terms of governing the conversion of crypto to crypto, fiat to crypto trading, things like that. And maybe I also want to get a credit token license so that I can actually act as the issuer for, asset-backed tokens or different kinds of tokens like that. And by drawing together some of these licenses, I am covered in terms of all the license activities that I want to do. But that's really just one step. That's me getting licensed as an entity. The second and equally important step that I need to contemplate is the business activities that I'm going to undertake. What are the rules around that? There's no use getting a license as a new player if there are no rules governing my business activity, or worse, no clarity around those rules. And again, the ability for the Labuan FSA to apply its existing regulatory frameworks to some of these novel business activities is very, very important. Again, if you wanted to start a crypto exchange and you came on this money broking license, the rules and regulations governing everything from KYC to AML to all of the things, and I think Farah had a slide earlier showing the number of different statutes and acts that apply. Having that clear and stable operating environment is absolutely essential, especially when you combine it with the unique tax neutrality that Labuan provides. Again, very important when you're undertaking novel services. The one thing I think everyone on this call would want to avoid as operators is uncertainty. I don't know how I'm going to be licensed. I don't know how my business activities are going to be treated. I don't know how they're going to be taxed. That is deadly for someone trying to set up a new business. And again, I think Labuan uniquely provides a stable operating environment for all of these things. And maybe we can move to my last slide, if I'm not mistaken. And really just to sum up, everything that Farah was talking and some of the things I've been talking about that ecosystem in Labuan and why, again, I think that is so important. Again, the pick and mix toolbox approach, I think I've talked plenty about, I think is absolutely essential. And the proof is in the pudding. As Farah showed the slide, there is a massive amount of people coming to Labuan today. The number of licensed entities has grown to 85, as we've seen. And I actually know firsthand that there are a plethora of other firms in the application process. And I think over the next 12 months, I wouldn't be surprised if we see that number doubling yet again. People from all over Asia have recognized that Labuan really can and will be a hub for innovative digital services. But the second part, as I talked about, having a supportive regulator is just as important. And not just supportive in terms of getting licensed or the business activities, equally important, and again, I can say this from firsthand knowledge, is the willingness of the regulator to be innovative, to contemplate entirely novel ideas. I'm always eternally grateful for the fact that, you know, under my job as Fusang CEO, I'm constantly talking to the regulators because a lot of the things that we do are novel, and the Labuan FSA is always willing to listen, always willing to start from first principles and say, well, okay, given our existing regulatory environments, how can we fit this into context and how can we make this work together? And really that approach of saying, look, as a regulator, it's our job to make sure we have a stable and vibrant operating environment, not just to say no to everything. Point number 3, and of course, I think we've got on the panel later a number of people from different fintech associations across Malaysia. I can tell you there's a vibrant ecosystem, not only of firms, but of talent as well. And certainly Fusang as a company, we've been very grateful to be able to find incredible staff in Labuan, including doing things like software engineering that I think a lot of people would not expect to house in a traditional mid-shore financial center. You know, to run through maybe some of these other points real fast, you know, Labuan does have a currency neutral operating environment. I think this is something that people ask a lot about Labuan. Does it come under currency controls? Do I have issues moving money in and out? And again, right, you can choose to operate in a number of different currencies. Obviously, for most firms, the USD is still the default, but I don't think a lot of people realize that you can actually elect to pick your own reference currency, that you can choose even from a different global accounting standards. Again, most people will pick something like IFRS, but there's no particular reason why you couldn't decide I wanted to operate in a different base currency and pick a different internationally recognized accounting standard. You know, again, tax as a mid-shore jurisdiction and being a tax neutral jurisdiction, I think is one of Labuan's key strengths, not just in terms of knowing what the tax is, but in terms of understanding how, for a new financial service, how you might be taxed, which is not always clear in a lot of jurisdictions. Point number 6, you know, Labuan does have incredibly well-developed infrastructure. Obviously, travel these days is a little harder, but for those of you who haven't been, I would highly encourage it. Labuan has a fantastic airport, a fantastic financial park, and more importantly, a whole ecosystem of service providers. Unlike a lot of mid-shore financial centers, Labuan has, if I'm not mistaken, something like 40+ banks, where I can correct me, but a lot. And a lot of the largest global recognized household names are all based in Labuan. And all of the other service providers that you'd expect, law firms, accounting firms, etc., everything that goes into needing to run a new company, a new licensed entity. Sharia is obviously one, and the point number 7, one of Malaysia's core strengths. If I'm not mistaken, Malaysia accounts for 98% of all Sharia issuances in the world by, you know, asset volume. And again, the ability to take that and layer it on top of a novel digital product, I think is incredibly exciting, as is the massive wave towards ESG products and strategies that you're seeing in the world today. Anyway, maybe just to wrap up, because I'd love to move to the panel discussion in a bit and hear from some of my fellow panelists and hear firsthand from their experiences operating in Labuan. But I would say that, and I'm sure that if many of you on the call and are exploring or thinking about coming and setting up in Labuan, the truth is you're exploring other jurisdictions as well. Maybe you've had conversations with other regulators as well. And I would challenge you to find a regulator that is more friendly, more open, and more innovative than Labuan FSA and the Labuan IBFC is. But anyway, thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Henry. As always, we can always count on you to advocate Labuan so positively and from your first-hand experience. So stay on the screen with us. Let me invite our other 2 panel speakers, Harpreet Mann, President of Access Malaysia, as well as Wilson Bae, Vice President of FinTech Association of Malaysia, to join you on the panel. And with that, I hand over the session to our panel and moderator, Farah Jafar.
Thanks, Waiman. Thanks, Henry, for that fantastic presentation. Harpreet, thank you for joining us, representing Access Malaysia, and Wilson, thank you for joining us, representing the FinTech Association of Malaysia. So I've got three gentlemen representing all things digital in our country. Now, that's an interesting way to spend a Thursday afternoon, I think. So let's see, where do we start? I think one of the things, coming out of that conversation, your presentation, actually, I should say, Henry, is, and my presentation was the fact that we're talking a lot about licenses that are available in Labuan, right? So how potential users or license holders can use Labuan. But what I'd like to talk about a little bit, and especially when we start talking with fintech associations and startups, is the fact that Labuan actually has an amazing corporate structure and ability for Labuan to be used for fundraising on that corporate side. So, my novice way of looking at it is quite simply this. There's that digital element, which is the client-facing bit, and then there's also, and the development bit, but there's also the corporate structuring bit that's so important for a lot of startups. Because if that corporate structuring is not done well or clear enough from get-go, when we're looking at a potential exit strategy, or when we're looking to bring in more investors as you need, because as a startup will grow, then this is where sometimes the kink appears in the development of that particular startup. So, Henry, would you like to share your experience with Fusang and how you've used not just the ability to get a digital asset exchange license in Labuan, but really, from a corporate structuring point of view, how you have used Labuan?
Absolutely. I mean, look, I talked a lot in general about the ecosystem during my presentation, and I think maybe it'd be useful for people to hear about Fusang's specific experience in these last few years setting up in Labuan.
Yeah.
When we first wanted to metamorphose into focusing on digital asset infrastructure, Labuan was quite frankly a natural choice for us. We've operated here for a very long time across our greater group. We have a high degree of confidence in the jurisdiction. But the first thing we did when we went to the Labuan FSA in 2017, when digital assets and crypto were still very fringe, quite frankly, is to say, okay, well, how do we get licensed? Certainly back then, people were very interested in things like crypto, but very scared. And we knew that we needed not only to be a licensed entity, but to operate in a jurisdiction that was willing to apply rules to us, to give investors that sense of certainty and stability. And obviously being able to take existing licenses and apply them to digital and to crypto was incredibly important for us. But Fusang's core business is helping companies issue what I call security tokens. And so, of course, it was very natural that for our own company, we wanted to be able to digitize, to tokenize our own shares. The parent company for Fusang Corp, again, we naturally housed in Labuan for a lot of the benefits, as you mentioned, Farah. But we wanted to be able to actually issue our shares as digital tokens instead of paper share certificates. And if I'm not mistaken, we were one of the first people, again, to come to Labuan FSA with this very novel idea. And again, I'm grateful that they said, all right, let's look at this in a time when very few regulators were willing to do something like that. And together, we looked at some of the LFSSA, the Securities Act, the Companies Act, etc. And we said, look, I mean, in principle, there's no particular reason why we can't do this. Yeah. Right? We need to fit with certain operational guidelines, but why not? Paper share cert, token-based share certificate, great. It took a bit of doing, but we managed to fully digitize all of our own shares, again, working in partnership with the Labuan FSA. And to me, that's a prime example of what I was talking about earlier, the willingness to say, any jurisdiction needs rules, right? We need a stable operating environment. But like any company, jurisdictions need to constantly innovate and update as well. And as long as you start from first principles and you say, well, what's the intent behind this regulation? What's it trying to achieve? And how can we do this in a different way? I think that's very powerful. So, one of the things that we were working on with Labuan, just to give an anecdote, was in terms of seals. Traditional company shares have a red wax seal on them, if anyone's ever seen. And the idea behind that seal was so that you would know that the issuing company had duly authorized that share, that someone hadn't just printed it out in a printer somewhere. And we said, look, we get it. shares need to be authorized by the company. It makes total sense. Is there a way we can put a digital seal on a token so that, again, it's been authorized and issued by the company? And again, I think Labuan FSA was very open to that idea. Again, staying within the context and the bounds of legislation, but focusing on the principle of regulation and updating it for new technology. And I can say again that we've done this over and over and over again with Labuan FSA. We've taken novel ideas to them, and they've always been very, very willing to at least listen. Huge amount of infrastructure in Labuan, and I'm very grateful for it.
No, but it's absolutely true, because they fundamentally as regulators, they accept that this is the way forward. I think so. In the first instance, there's no resistance to it. And when the resistance is eradicated, what you have is facilitation. And it's great. Wilson, talk us through Policy Street and your experience being, I think, maybe one of the newest members of our digital family.
Sure, Farah. I'm Wilson, the co-founder of Policy Street, and I also double hat as the Vice President of the FinTech Association of Malaysia. As a FinTech startup founder, I think most of us running a startup and a FinTech enterprise, we are always looking for a few key factors to grow our business to greater heights. Number one, it is really about how do we achieve market access, not just in one country, but multiple markets in the region or across the globe. And number two is really about enabling a scalable business model so that we are able to scale our business offerings, not just to one company, but hundreds of organizations, not just to one community, but multiple communities. And third, I think as a FinTech company, I think Henry was mentioning regulation is of utmost importance. We are okay to be bound by regulations. And of course, we are inclined to speak and to cooperate fully with regulators who are forward-looking, who are open-minded, which would help spearhead new business models to help serve new business needs in this so-called Web 3.0 era, a hot term of today, the buzzword of today.
Yeah, 3.0.
So that's right. And the story of Policy Street as an insurance tech startup, we started off in Malaysia, and we obtained a license from the onshore regulator, from the Central Bank of Malaysia, as a full-fledged financial advisor and as an Islamic financial advisor, which allows us to work with almost all insurers in the country. And we effectively serve as a distributor where we customize microinsurance, innovative products to serve the underserved and the underprivileged markets. So today, we serve more than 100,000 gig workers on the street of Malaysia, the likes of people who deliver food to your doorsteps, especially at the peak of COVID-19. All of their insurance coverage are actually customized and insured through Policy Street. And I think over the past few months or past few quarters, we realized that this need of microinsurance or innovative fintech solutions is ubiquitous, not just in Malaysia, but when we look at Indonesia, when we look at the Indo-China market, even in the Philippines, a lot of the underserved populations in those segments, in those markets, require a similar solutions. And we have two options in order to penetrate these markets. Number one is to go through, of course, the onshore jurisdictions applications, which we are exploring and we are advancing. But through different research and of course, through the promotions of Labuan IBFC and through our connections and introduction to the Labuan FSA team, we realized that there is actually another pathway which allows a fintech company like Policy Street to fast track our regionalizations journey. And I think this is what Farah was mentioning, the importance of corporate structuring. And this is where I think sometime last year, we started to really embark in the journey of truly applying a license from Labuan FSA. And we aim to be a truly regional insurtech player. And most recently, a couple of months ago, we successfully secured a general insurance and reinsurance license. I think this license is one of the highest tiered licenses in Labuan FSA. to be secured through our FSA to be given to Policy Street. And this license allows us to work with jurisdictions across the world. And of course, our primary concentration will be in Southeast Asia. And this allows us to speed up our expansion to Indonesia and other markets, because Labuan FSA, or Labuan as a mid-shore jurisdiction, is also globally recognized by different insurers, different jurisdictions. And I think this is something which is not prominently known by many industry players. I think Labuan is known as a hub for captive, for traditional insurance players, but not many knows that as an insurtech player, Labuan has a breeding ground to provide for digital financial institutions, especially for a traditional industry like insurance. And this is where I'm very passionate, right, and to promote the Labuan FSA and also opportunities. And together with the FinTech Association of Malaysia, we see that Labuan provides a complementary opportunity for a lot more inbound and outbound businesses to really tap into this mid-shore jurisdiction to propel the company to greater heights. So
Yeah,
this is why I'm so truly passionate about the opportunities that's offered by Labuan.
Yeah, I mean, between the two of you, gentlemen, what we have here is a very interesting juxtaposition, right? So you've got Henry, who started completely regional, so everything or global, actually, right, with regards to his exchange, which is fantastic. And obviously, that exchange then has access to anyone who's a qualified investor globally. What you've done with Policy Street, Wilson, is kind of a little bit more organic, in the sense that you've grown from your home, and then as you're looking out into that bigger space, you realize that what you need is a combination of a wholesale intermediation, risk intermediation center, together with partnerships on the ground. So when you have partnerships on the ground, so for example, in order to access the Indonesian market, your Labuan unit will have to then work with a partner in Indonesia, correct?
That's right.
So you see, that is what we're trying to really share, is the fact that it allows for a very cost efficient yet effective platforming for digital players. Because really, you know, the digital space, I mean, my limited experience is anyway that the digital space is the most partnership prone space there is, right? Everyone's very open, the thinking is very open. So this is what really I was trying to get at from this question, to juxtapose you two gentlemen, to see for everyone to be able to see really how you can, you know, different businesses can benefit from Labuan. And I wanted to bring Harpreet into the conversation, actually. And for Harpreet, obviously, it's a lot larger than just licenses, you know. And it's interesting. So this Web 3.0 and how everything's going to be decentralized, and you know, the thoughts of decentralized finance. You know, I'm very curious about how this is going to work with a center like Labuan, actually, because and this is a question where, you know, I guess none of us have an answer, but the idea of, let's say, a DAO that is being used now via a Cayman foundation can actually be used in Labuan as well, because we have the same company, as in like the foundation, the private client foundation, or the foundation as an entity, which can be used for decentralized autonomous organization. What are your thoughts on DeFi and that whole space vis-a-vis a jurisdiction that's already so forward thinking like Labuan? How do you think we can move forward in the, even more forward in this space?
Okay, yeah, thank you for this question. So I mean, like, for the viewers who are still wondering what is DeFi and what's DAO and what exactly this term means, I think I will just explain in a very quick manner. So DeFi stands for decentralized finance, where what is decentralized about it is that the governance of that particular financial service is kind of decentralized, where you have, like in our current financial system, on a mainstream financial system, you have central bank as the central regulatory governance body that governs the whole financial system. In decentralized finance, you have communities, you have the ecosystem, you have the token holders who actually kind of govern the particular technology and the particular financial service, right? So if you have seen, actually, I would actually also like to see and also like to comment on what IBFC has done so far. If you see in the trend from 2017 to 2020, you can see that there was a huge rise of ICOs. A lot of companies were trying to raise funds. They were trying to build exchanges, trying to build digital asset custodians. And a lot of these activities actually had some sort of licensing or some sort of structures that can be utilized. And actually, Labuan had actually did a really good job in terms of incorporating it in their early toolbox. But now we are seeing a different wave since 2019, right? We are seeing the emergence of financial services, decentralized financial services, emergence of new company corporate structures. When we talk about DAO, when we say decentralized autonomous organizations, what they are, in essence, there's a bunch of smart contracts of codes at the back where they are actually kind of stimulating an organization, right? If you want to do voting, you want to do decision making, you want to like ask for requests, you want to comments, all of those are done digitally now. And there's a new trend as well in the market space where it is actually becoming more and more leaderless and more democratic in that particular market. If you can see the trend from 2019, the market and the whole industry has slowly get more and more leaderless, where you can see a lot of projects where you don't even know who are the people running at the back, right? And you do not even know like who's the founders. From the founding of Bitcoin, who we still do not know who Satoshi Nakamoto is. Nowadays, we don't even have a name reference on who exactly is the owner of Project X, right? There's not even a name reference, just a funny picture on Twitter, right? So things have started to emerge, and a lot of money is still flowing into the industry because they believe in the core fundamentals of this particular industry, right? If you can see today in our current financial system, and not only the financial system, overall the whole nation itself, we have huge amount of inequity, right? In terms of who is holding the wealth, who is holding the majority shares, who's holding, like a majority of the leadership positions. It's very unequal kind of society. When we talk about decentralized finance and the emergence of DAOs and this whole ecosystem, is trying to kind of rebalance back that equation. Even in terms of the internet, 90% of the internet today is actually on cloud, and 90% of the clouds are owned by 6 companies, right? Out there in the world. So there's even the emergence and the discussion of decentralized internet right now, where people can actually run their own internet and run their own ecosystems, and can actually, and even have applications that you actually have a kind of a more democratic governance on it. And even the ownership of data, there's actually more decentralized, and at the same time, people can actually own and control their own data and actually decide on what they want to do with it, right? So that sort of new fundamentals and new innovations are being coming that actually coming out in this space every day. Almost every day you're hearing new concepts, like in DeFi, you're hearing decentralized loan markets, decentralized exchanges, decentralized insurance services, decentralized credit companies. Now we even have decentralized prediction markets, decentralized bond issuance, and we even have a decentralized central bank kind of a concept, right?
Do you, I mean, all three of you, this is a question for all three of you. I mean, so we've seen a situation where the industry wasn't interested in being regulated, and then everybody wanted to be regulated. And then, you know, in theory, coming to some kind of a middle ground, right? And then now you've got this decentralized DeFi and all the rest of it. Do you think this is going to pan out to be that last breakthrough into this new world of finance? Or do you think there's going to be a pullback and everyone will start looking at structures so there can be some semblance of understanding, even forget about, you know, licensing, you know? I mean, the concept of nobody owning something for someone like me, who is a very legacy kind of girl, it's quite scary.
To just comment on that, actually every phase in the industry, they'll actually go multiple phases. You have the experimentation phase, you have the R&D phase, and then you have the maturity phase, right? So we can see like the ICO section went from the experimentation to the R&D, and now it started to get regulated when it's actually want more certainty in the way you actually raise your funds, and they want to actually establish more trust. So now the DeFi is going through the experimentation phase. right? It is actually experimenting many new types of use cases, many new types of products, many new types of approaches to do DeFi. And it will come a time when they would want to get mature and they would want to get regulated as well. But currently, there are not many frameworks and toolkits that are available for that, right? A toolkit approach works best as long as you have tools that fits, right? But when actually you want to go up and build new tools, I think a sandbox approach will make more sense right now, echoing from what Henry has said earlier. So this is my perspective on that in that particular comment. But I think over time you will actually need to develop more set of toolkits where you actually can govern or have some sort of legal wrappers towards how DAOs can operate and how leaderless associations or organizations can operate, right? So in this case, how will that particular arrangement be governed from a regulator point of view? And at the same time, I think there has to be two different change of mindset in regulation. This is an agile industry. It is always changing. It is always growing. It's always learning.
Yeah.
Regulation has to be agile and it has to be digital. You have to digitize as well. So that's my perspective on it.
Yeah. Henry, Wilson, what do you think? Do you think, like a foundation, a Labuan foundation could be something that we could use as a legal wrapper that Harpreet was talking about?
Absolutely. And maybe to answer your earlier question, I think the answer is both. I think that Web3 and similar ideas are going to represent the largest transformation in capital markets that the world has seen in 400 years since we did the first IPO of the Dutch East India Company. Yeah. I also think you're going to see a general pulling back in the sense of people saying, hey, just because it's Web3 doesn't mean it's all magically nice. Doesn't, we still need to apply the same filters and say, is this project good or not, right? Just because it's operating in a more decentralized fashion does not, well, if anything, makes it even more important.
More, exactly. Yes.
And I do think that, even if you had a DAO, for example, you will still need legal personality just because that's the way the world works. You need legal personality to enter into contracts, for example. But maybe the governance of that entity can work in a different way to how traditional entities work. And that, to me, is really where the interesting things will start to happen. That the intersection of how can we have new technology, as Harpreet was saying, with still understanding that, like it or not, there are certain legal and regulatory realities in the world. And maybe one final plug for Labuan, because I see our time ticking down. I think that Labuan is perfectly suited for this, right? In a digital world, geographical boundaries matter an awful lot less than they used to. Once upon a time, financial centers grew up, quite frankly, because of proximity, as much as any other factor. And if you look at a map, that you can see how financial centers, midshore financial centers are often very close to onshore financial centers. But for the first time, especially in the post-COVID world, digitization means that these geographical boundaries are going to start dissolving. And I think Labuan is perfectly suited to be a home for a number of exciting projects, including things like Web3 and decentralized organizations.
It is very interesting. Wilson?
Yeah, so the time is remaining. So
it doesn't matter. We can extend a little bit. That's fine.
Yeah. So I have 2 points to make. Right. The first point is really about Labuan as the go-to center for a lot more fintech or digital companies. And I personally think that the pick and mix toolbox methodology is something very interesting, because startups and businesses are able to get into action immediately. And this is what is pretty much appreciated by investors and also consumers. I'll give you a clear example. Policy Street, recently we have closed the funding round from leading global and regional investors in Singapore, leading VCs and family offices. And they do recognize the importance and the significance of the license that we have obtained from Labuan to be a stepping stone, if not a cornerstone, for our entire regionalizations piece. And I think this is something which is very valuable and worth promoting and pursuing. And number 2, in terms of decentralizations, I think this is something very interesting. And I truly believe in an efficient market in both demand and supply. Again, I go back to the insurance industry, being one of the oldest industries in the world. It started off as a decentralized framework. The maritime traders, they started off to pool together fund, and they help each other when catastrophic event takes place. And somewhat throughout the next many centuries, it becomes centralized to have underwriters where premium is underwritten by a few parties, and you need to be a subscriber in order to be protected and insured. However, we have started to see that the industry is slowly but progressively going back to the decentralized mode where it could be made very effective with technology. Just look at China, where we have companies like Waterdrop or Xianghubao by Alibaba. There is no one centralized underwriter per se. It is all part of the big data play where hundreds of millions of subscribers, by putting in funds as low as 20 cent renminbi, 50 cent renminbi, to pool together to support their peers who are in required of medical bills expenses, right? And this is in the form of decentralizations. And I think with AI, with machine learning, these technologies are able to eradicate fraud. Because I think one of the questions of why decentralization is quickly taking place is because with technology, fraud can be minimized. And like what Harpreet said, trust can be established. And if we are seeing this trend in such a traditional industry, such as the insurance industry, it will be no surprise to see the rest of the other industries following suit to go into decentralization mode.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, this is the rise of the mutuals, right? And as it's called in the insurance industry, the rise of the mutuals, and it's fantastic. And you know, I personally have always felt that mid-shore centers, wholesale financial intermediation centers, and the digital space have a national affinity, because neither of us actually respect boundaries. We don't respect jurisdictional boundaries. It's just that is as basic as you're going to get it. You know, and because of that, the mentality and the ethos is actually very similar. And the ability to kind of move forward with something new is ingrained in us, I guess. You know, always challenging something, always looking at how best to make it better and what else can we push forward. So yeah, with that, I'd like to thank all three of you for joining us today. I'd like to thank everyone who registered and attended today. This is actually our last webinar for Labuan IBFC for the year. And I'd like to thank everyone, especially in the digital community, for their support. It's been fantastic, and we look forward to seeing you again next year. Thank you very much, everyone.